Welcome to another episode of the Anabolic Enquiry with myself, Tyson and the Strongmanway, and Mr. Connor Walsh. Welcome, Connor.
How we going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great.
Looking peeled at the moment, actually. You saw the wake up story with the road maps on the legs, looking nice and tight.
Yeah, having a little bit of fun,
How's the
mucking
cut
around.
feeling?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad at all.
You said you had a bit of a growth phase, and now you're sort of back to dropping it down a little bit.
Obviously, I had a big push up last year I got up to about 127, just kind of
You
going
heavy
after
boy.
that. Yeah, for not too long. We sat over 120 for most of last year, kind of chasing that 400 kilo squat, and
Yeah.
then I got hurt, obviously, just post nationals. So decided to drop a bunch of weight, get lean, and kind of rinse and repeat, and we'll start another growth phase when I'm ready to go again.
What's your body weight at the moment?
About 108.5.
Ooh, that's
Yeah, come down a fair
lean for like
bit.
108. That's carrying a bit of mass.
Yeah, I've only been back training upper body for about 2 and a bit weeks, so I'm
Yeah.
hoping that we can slap a little bit more back on.
I train upper body the whole time, and mine doesn't look like that. But let's move on.
Neither does my deadlift though.
Yeah. Well, we all get one thing. You got to squat. Today we're going to go through the second part of the family tree. We sort of talked about the testosterone family, which is a larger one last week, and this week we're going through the DHT and 19 Nor families. Before we get into some of the other, man, there is just so much other fun stuff to talk about. I'm really interested to talk about. I just want to jump ahead like a couple months and get into like the nootropics and like the other performance based stuff. I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
it a lot.
sweet.
But today we're going to talk about the brick and mortar, the things that most guys go to first, the things that are like the staples for everybody else outside of testosterone, right? So the testosterone family we've been through. We're going to kick off with the DHT family. Tell us a little bit about DHT. Give us a little bit of a rundown, and then we'll get stuck into some of these compounds.
So DHT is a very small variation on testosterone chemically. There is an enzyme in the body called 5-alpha reductase, which slightly varies the carbon double bond at the fourth and fifth carbon, I believe, and replaces it with a hydrogen. Um, the chemical change in the structure allows it to no longer be able to aromatize, so it can't turn into estrogen. Um, some of them have potential anti-estrogenic, either through aromatase-like or aromatase inhibitor-like or selective estrogen receptor modulator-like effects, either directly from the hormone itself or from downstream metabolites. Um, Obviously, it's a lot more androgenic of a compound than testosterone, or the derivatives tend to be a lot more androgenic. A little bit more target specific to tissues, so prostates, hairline, stuff like that. It's going to go after quite hard. But yeah, it's quite a large family. There's quite a few different drugs within this side of the family tree that some have quite varying, whilst they're chemically very similar, the actual outcome of the drugs are very different. Like, for example, you got Anadrol and Masteron,
Yeah, we
both in the
talk
same
about
family tree, but
we talked a lot about shopping characteristics, right? Like even though they're from
yeah.
the same family, like the same like branch of that family, very different characteristics. So I understand that they are DHT derivatives, but the characteristics of those drugs in that DHT family are going to provide very different expressions when taken, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Quickly on the obviously, I guess in a lot of ways we would sort of talk about like outcome and cost. So potentially a lot of these, like you said, like a lot of these compounds are more tissue selective and obviously like more androgenic. So like we're talking about they have probably some greater expressions or probably some would you say what's the best way to put this? Maybe like a cost benefit, like the benefit is high in terms of like improving strength, or the benefit of taking the compound is maybe greater than some of those testosterone derivatives, or just like testosterone in and of itself, but the cost is a little bit higher in terms of side effects or other things that come alongside it.
I think there's a spectrum on it. Primobolan and Masteron, I think, are
Yeah, look, yeah,
probably
true.
Yeah, probably very similar in terms of overall risk factor to testosterone. In fact, some would possibly argue less just due to obviously the lack of aromatization, stuff like
Yeah, for sure.
that. But yeah, then obviously you've got kind of your anadrols and yeah, there's a few other cool little orals. I don't know if you were back remember some of the pro hormones back in the day that were around, or like the methylstemolones and a few of those bits and pieces. We did Superdrol, for example, which
Yeah.
is for me the cost of Superdrol is just completely unwarranted. It's something I can't.
It's very
2 weeks,
interesting
every
when
single
people
time
go,
I've ever tried to run it. 2 weeks,
yeah,
I'm so sick.
yeah. I've never, um, but I logically have never. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't
Yeah.
see the benefit outside of some of these other options as well. So, and you sort of talked about the hairline. So, very common. So we start to see like a regression of hairline or like hair loss or an escalation, I guess we could say, like it sort of expedites that
Yes.
process a little bit.
Yeah.
And the prostate as well. One thing, like, I was listening to a podcast recently talking about like the prostate and just like some things guys aren't aware of. Like if you're going to take a piss like 3 times or 4 times a night, like that's probably something to be like, oh, hang on a second, like this might be impacting my prostate a little bit.
For sure. Yeah.
I think just like I didn't think of that. I didn't know that. Do you know what I mean? Like I think sometimes we're quite in tune with our bodies, but sometimes we don't actually think about some of these things like, oh, like my hairline's going back a little bit. Like I'm just over 30. That's fine. Or, hey, like I'm pissing it. There's a reason why when you go to like powerlifting or strongman, everyone's bald head with fucking beards, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
I had someone come up to me at the gym yesterday and say, I noticed your Masteron haircut. I was like,
yeah.
well, I can't deny it because it is.
Yeah, 100%, right? But like I think that like often we maybe aren't super aware that like some of these side effects are taking place if we don't know the markers. Like and it's important maybe to even know some of those as well. But let's talk about one of the, and I know you've talked about it, you sort of mentioned it in maybe just one of our chats. I can't remember if it was on a podcast or just having a chat, but one of the not even just the OGs, but one of the almost just staples, right? Like if you think about testosterone, one of the first things that we often put into as a supplementary in a cycle will be Masteron, right? Can you give us the a little bit of a rundown and background on Masteron?
Yep. So highly androgenic, has some kind of estrogenic control properties in most people, whether that be through actually lowering serum estradiol through an aromatase inhibitor-like effect or a selective estrogen receptor modulator effect, where you're not actually lowering circulating estrogen but stopping it binding at certain sites, which is the more common of the two impacts that I seem to see Masteron have with clients. I actually
Yeah,
don't see it lower serum estrogen very often.
yeah.
Um, Drives a large amount of kind of that acetylcholine pathway. So a lot of neural drive. I think it's a very, very good drug for strength.
Even skill
Obviously,
acquisition, right? Or skill expression.
yep. Yeah, it's something I would tend to use with pretty much everyone in a peaking phase when they're trying to express maximal strength.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, continue. So estrogenic control, acetylcholine pathway.
Uh, Something that can be pushed quite high. If you're someone who needs a pretty high milligrammage, it's one that I've personally pushed pretty high. In fact, it typically in a prep will make up something like 2/3 of my anabolic load.
What is the benefit of running it so high?
Um, Controlling side effects is one big thing. I've personally had gyno since I was like 12 or 13, a really
Yeah,
fat child. And I just get fairly sensitive nipples, even if, especially with anything 19 nor related. I really can't run much 19 nor.
yeah,
For more than anything, it comes down to roughly where I know where my total milligram needs to be. Masteron is very low on the side effect profile for me. I've obviously got no hair already, so that's not an issue.
yeah,
And yeah, I just obviously it's not super water intensive. In fact, it tends to be quite dry. So blood pressure and stuff like that doesn't tend to be quite as bad as
yeah,
some of your more bloat heavy steroids.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, it fits what I'm looking for perfectly. So
Yeah. So do you run a high to counteract a higher milligram across like a testosterone 19 or some of the other compounds, like even the other DHT compounds, to counteract some of the maybe side effects or like expressions of those drugs, or do you think there's a benefit from a strength standpoint to run the Masteron high?
I do think there's a direct benefit. Like I think milligram for milligram, Masteron's probably going to be better for strength expression than most other drugs.
Cool. Interesting.
Obviously, like, I mean, look, not in comparison to like orals and
Yeah.
Trenbolone, but as far as your kind of safer androgens, I would say it's probably the best for most people in terms
Super
of
interesting.
strength expression.
Mhm. Uh,
Um, yeah, a lot of it really just as well comes down to the side effect profile. Is I know I can push that up to some pretty high doses and just not really notice,
yeah. No,
you know, apart from the fact that I'm putting a big needle in my bum every day. But
yeah.
aside from that, it's yeah.
Interesting. 'Cause I never really like, obviously it's in there regularly, and obviously I've always looked at it as, yes, understanding that it's like great from estrogenic control point, great from like even like skill, and like great from like the acetylcholine pathway to drive strength, but never as like a primary driver. Do you know what I mean? I'm never looking at it as like, I'm always looking at it as an ancillary instead of like the star, if that makes sense.
Look, I will also say with me, I do not do well with Tren anymore, so I
Yeah.
really can't run much in the way of Tren.
Mhm.
Which obviously, Tren tends to be bread and butter for a lot of powerlifters, especially I think as they're younger. I
Yeah.
think you tend to see people move away from Tren a little bit more as you get old.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, I just can't eat on Tren. I can do it when I'm cutting,
Yep.
or at very, very low doses, like
Yep.
sub 20 milligrams a day. But yeah, if I'm anything over kind of 6,000 calories, which I am 95% of the year above 6,000 calories,
Yeah,
I
sure.
throw up. I can't get the food down.
Okay, interesting. Any negative side effects to Masteron that people would be aware, like need to be aware of? I guess we've already covered that there's not really, right?
Look, obviously, same side effects that apply with all drugs,
Mhm.
or all steroids. Obviously, hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis shutdown.
Yeah.
Um, you can run into estrogenic issues in terms of crashing your estrogen. Some people are
Yeah, it's a
more
good.
sensitive to yeah, some people are more sensitive to the lowering effect of Masteron on estrogen. And also, if you're just structuring your cycle incorrectly, like you wouldn't want to run a Masteron only cycle because you would absolutely, obliterate your estrogen. So, um, obviously, hairline, prostate growth, stuff that comes with your pretty standard DHT
Yeah.
profiles. Um, Aggression can be a little bit of an issue, especially if you're pushing it up higher. I do find it to be
Yeah.
one that's like I'll put it to you this way: when I'm on a higher dose of Masteron, the thing I probably notice most is I'll subconsciously grind my teeth more.
Interesting. What do you know the mechanism behind why that might be, or is it just kind of like a
I
person?
would guess I would guess acetylcholine pathway.
Yeah.
Obviously, kind of just like that stimulatory, kind
Yep.
of always in a sympathetic
Yeah, sure.
nervous system state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then half-life or injection frequency is obviously dependent on like whether it's like propionate, right, or enaphate. Do you use like an EP? What's your preference? Do you have a preference there?
Pretty much always E.
Yeah.
Only time I'd really ever go for P is if there's a reason that you need it to be in and out quickly, or I mean TRT guys have got a blood test to whatever. But yeah,
Especially when you're looking at total volume. Do you know what I mean? Like weekly total volume, if you're like driving something up quite high, you don't want something
yeah,
that's going to be 100 milligrams per mil. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just
definitely not. Yeah.
it's just more work. So every second day or twice a week sort of thing for like a mass D, and every day for a mass P would sort of be like where you would usually keep your frequency.
Yep, I think for most people that's about right. I personally still like to split anything above kind of a gram or so across daily injections. I just find
Mhm.
that more manageable
Yeah.
with smaller
Yeah.
injection shots, but two or
Especially,
three would be fine.
I think people need to like understand like if you're running and like there'll be people listening to this on all different levels of their like performance drug use, right? So if you're taking 600 milligrams of testosterone, you're taking 3 mils a week, essentially, right? Or ish. Yeah. And then you're also looking at taking Masteron, and you might be taking that at 600. milligrams a week, and that's also 3 mils a week. So now you've got to look at 6 milligrams a week, and that's not including anything else that you might be including, right? So it's like, how do you split that up appropriately? And like it might be 1 mil of each 6 days a week. It might be, but it's unlikely that you're going to barrel that once a week. Do you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
even twice a week starts to become cumbersome, right? Or leaving more scar tissue and stuff like that as well. So just things to consider.
I think another thing people need to remember is at the end of the day, our gym performance, especially as a strength athlete, is the only thing that matters. If you're walking into the gym with a massive cork in your quad because you've just put 5 cc's in it and you can't train properly, then the drugs aren't doing you any good.
Yeah, correct. I feel like most of us have probably been there somewhere where it's like, I've got a back cork so bad I can't squat. I have to miss my squats. It's
Yeah.
like I cannot, you know. Blood work considerations, anything that we should be looking out for in our blood work on Masteron. Things that we might see that's specific to that particular drug.
Again, really just comes back to the estrogen.
Yeah.
From most other fronts, it's quite mild. There's no real mechanism for liver toxicity, modest kidney toxicity, mainly through kind of normal drivers of increased blood pressure and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It does still have an impact on the renin-aldosterone angiotensin system, less so than many of your other steroids, but there is still some potential for some water kind of retention and skewing there.
Mhm.
But yeah, it wouldn't be too much. Yeah, that's kind of specific for Masteron on
Yeah.
blood work panels.
With that drop in estrogen, which will probably come up a little bit through this in terms of like other compounds that may have similar effect. In terms of levers to manage that, if you are finding that the Masteron, if you want to run the Masteron high, but you are finding that you're quite sensitive to that dropping your estradiol or estrogen down, is there ways to counteract that to make sure the estrogen is staying reasonable?
Um, Obviously, testosterone is probably going to be your most commonly used lever.
Yeah.
You could look at other aromatizing drugs, potentially a Dianabol if you were looking to throw an oral in at some point, which is going to give you a methyl estradiol, which is somewhat going to replace some of that estrogen-like effects of true estradiol. Um, yeah, obviously, just anything that aromatizes would be kind of where you'd go to. It's more just going to have to kind of come down to playing with ratios of aromatizable versus
Yeah.
non-aromatizable compounds.
And the problem is most people won't like take. I find most people do blood work at the start of the cycle or maybe the end or after the cycle. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
it's like where am I at before I start, and how much damage should I do towards the end? Like, what do I need to
yeah.
like work on, right? Very, very uncommon. Like, unless you are noting some serious side effects, something like that, that you'll get like intermittent blood tests throughout that cycle. Is there a way that people can sort of like take a punt that like maybe their estrogen's crashing a little bit besides just being emotional? Is there ways that they can sort of monitor that?
Yeah, you might get a little bit of like sore joints and dryness,
Mhm.
reduction in sex drive, stuff of that nature, but it's definitely something that I wouldn't try to be, because the symptoms of high and low can often be confused.
Yeah,
And then
sure.
what do you do if if you're high but you
Yeah.
think you're low, and then it's like
Yeah, very true.
this is one lot. It's like, man, you can jump on iMedical and you can get just even a high
Just see.
sensitivity E2 test for like $70,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's a very accurate
yeah,
reading.
yeah. Key dosages for men.
Anywhere
Lower
from
threshold to upper threshold is probably a better way to put it.
uh massive range here. I think anywhere from about 100 milligrams to 2 grams is,
Okay. 2 grams?
yeah. I mean, I've personally been there.
That's a fucking good chunk weekly. That's a fair effort.
That was a lot. Yeah,
No
yeah.
wonder you got that
My
fucking
my
haircut, bro.
my last nationals prep was 1,050 tests, 2,100 masts, and 280 nandrolone. So that's
280, so low
kind of
nandrolone, real high mass, high test.
yeah.
Interesting. Dosages for women. Yay, nay? How much?
Very, very rarely. It's not something I've ever personally had a female on. There may be some applications, some of the physique related stuff at very low doses, but it's not a female friendly compound.
general. Oh, we were going to talk about like Anavar and stuff like that. Yeah, there's probably a few in here that would be. Oh, and Primo. Anyway, we're going to move on to Primo. I mean, this is interesting because I know they're the same family. Like they're all both sitting under like the DHT family. Confusing, not confusing, but some people think like they're interchangeable. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I use test or I use test, but do I use mass or do I use primo? Which one should I use? And I feel like people like confuse that they're not the fucking same thing, correct?
No, no, they're not.
Yes.
They
So
have some similar characteristics, but there's still some unique characteristics to each
yeah,
as well.
for sure. So it's not like oh, well, I've traded out my Primo for Masteron. There's benefits to Masteron, there's benefits to Primobolan. And like, yeah, if you're looking at budget or looking to pick like two or three compounds, maybe you would choose one over the other, depending on the characteristics that you're shopping for.
Yep,
Yeah,
definitely.
something to remember. And like I've read that in the forums where people are like, "Oh, I'm just considering." It's like, bro, no, that's not the same thing, right? Primo Bolin. Talk to me. So big uptick in Primo in terms of like popularity. You've got guys like JP, you've got guys like Vigorous Steve and Dan and stuff like that, all talking about Primo and giving it like that S tier fucking status. I know like JP, trained by JP, is a really big advocate, and all the bodybuilding guys are. Um, Benefits of Primo,
Yep.
characteristics of shopping.
So Primo is one that tends to have a little bit more of a I wouldn't quite call it universal, but a little bit more common of a lowering of serum estradiol levels in individuals.
Yeah,
It's still going to vary a decent amount person to person, but most people do seem to see some reduction in
yeah,
serum estradiol levels. Um, Obviously, it's female friendly on this side, so or more female friendly, definitely than Masteron. So whatever they've done change wise to the drug allows it to have a little bit less androgenic capacity within, kind of the non-target tissues.
Hmm.
Um, Again, similar to Masteron, it has a relatively low side effect profile overall. Um, Again, something that can be pushed up relatively high if you have a need for the higher total milligrams.
You have a thick wallet,
Um, yeah, and a
thick
thick wallet.
supplier.
And honestly, that's one of the biggest drawbacks for Primo
Yeah,
is just the fact
totally
it's
agree.
a lot less reliable that you're going to get it real,
Mhm.
and then obviously the cost as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a lot more clients test Primo and it come back fake than I have seen it come back real.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Other key characteristics why we would shop Primo over other drugs, or just in general, why are we shopping for Primo here?
Again, for the most part, it would be looking for a compound to make up a fairly large amount of that total milligram with, uh, no aromatizing capacity and on the lower end of the side effect profile. Again, no
Oh, the
steroids are
anabolic
side
profile
effect
is quite high.
free.
Sorry.
Yep, yep, no, definitely, yeah. So, look, on paper, I don't think it's actually super anabolic, but it is again something that if you wanted to, you can push it quite high in terms of milligrams and elicit quite a reasonable response from it with typically minimal side effects.
Often see this in bodybuilding with the Primobolan, and like versus Masteron. Let's say you are chopping for one or the other. As a strength athlete, talking about the acetylcholine or acetylcholine pathway, strength athletes leaning towards Masteron, bodybuilding athletes leaning towards Primobolan.
Um, I strength athletes definitely leaning towards Masteron. I've never suggested Primobolan really in a prep to anyone before.
Interesting.
Primobolan in an off season, I think is probably pretty warranted in strength, but
Yeah.
it's not something I've ever, except for one female who was already taking it. But from a male side of things, I've never suggested Primobolan
Yeah,
in a
sure.
strength prep.
Yeah.
Um, Masteron still has plenty of application in bodybuilding, especially in kind of that contest prep
Oh yeah, of
phase.
course. Yeah, most definitely. Yeah.
But yeah, off season wise, Primobolan's probably going to be most bodybuilders' preferred choice if they have no
We're choosing one or the other.
financial or yeah.
Um, I guess the outcomes on those negative side effects are mostly as above with the Masteron. So maybe even like a higher likelihood of looking at estrogen crashing and being conscious of that, and then the normal DHT based DHT based like side effects. Do you feel like Primobolan's got less of an impact on hairline and prostate?
Um, maybe slightly less harsh.
Yeah.
Primobolan does carry maybe a tiny bit of liver toxicity because it is orally bioavailable, so it has to be able to pass somewhat of the first metabolism
Yeah.
of the liver. So yeah, I don't think it's overly notable, but there is potential for a small amount of liver toxicity with the Primobolan that is not there with the Masteron.
Yeah.
Um, Other than that, I think side effect profiles are relatively similar in terms of blood work considerations and whatnot. It would be pretty much the exact same for
Yeah,
Masteron.
I've kind of just like gone across and sort of like pull that over as well. Like half-life or injection frequency will be 2 to 3 times a week, maybe daily as well, like anything. But it's generally you can get like a short ester Primobolan, like 100 milligram, I believe. But like most of the time, you'll find it'll be like 1 to 200 milligrams, but like a longer ester and longer half-life.
So Primo only really comes in an anthate as an injectable. There are some undergrounds that have made an acetate, but it's not
Yeah,
the acetate injectable was never actually a pharmaceutical
interesting.
version of Primobolan, but there is an oral Primobolan acetate.
Yeah. Also remembering that like did we talk about this? I can't remember we talked about this, but if you're finding that a drug, oh, we did talk about this with other drugs. If you're finding that there is a drug that is registered in your suppliers list that is not generally found elsewhere or is not how the pharmacies do it, there's probably a fucking reason why they don't do it. We talked about the crashing and stuff like that in different milligrams and getting
Yeah.
compounds stable within the within like that vial and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of variability there, right? So if you're fucking with that compound, often there's likely there was a reason originally while people are doing it one way.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. So very similar in terms of like probably a little bit more liver toxicity, the blood work, and then the estradiol drops and the normal like liver kidney toxicity and stuff like that as per DHT and Masteron. Blood work considerations and levers would be very similar to the Masteron. Key dosages I would assume pretty similar for male, so anywhere between 100 milligrams. I mean, I've heard guys say there's no point touching it until you get to 500 milligrams, which I don't think is incredibly accurate, but
No, agreed.
upper threshold.
Um, Look, I would say for Primo, it's probably a little bit lower just because most people do tend to have a little bit more of that estrogenic lowering effect, and also the cost just makes,
Yeah.
2 grams expensive cycle. I would say probably somewhere around the 1.5 to 1,400, about a
Yeah.
mil a day of the 200 milligram prep
Yeah.
would be probably about the upper for most people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
you obviously hear bodybuilders running it much higher, but for most, I don't think there's much.
yeah. And females.
I really don't use it with females very often in Australia. Again, just largely due to the unknowing,
Reliability.
yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, 50 milligrams a week would be kind of upper end for most females. I
Yeah.
think if you're going to go maybe 20 milligrams of Primo E to start a week, yeah, maybe moving up to about 50 to 60 milligrams. Obviously, if virilization is not a concern, you can definitely push higher than that. But
Yeah.
I think beyond
Above
there,
that
you're kind of
60, it
running a
starts to
pretty,
get a little bit dicey. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Or just a little bit more of a consideration, depending on person to person, like female to female, right?
yeah,
So just quickly on that, so like you don't often use Primo here. We've talked a little bit about the female side of stuff, but we mostly talked previously about the fact that you would probably preference like an MPP or something, correct?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Progesterone activity, and common. It's very rarely
Easy. Yeah,
fakes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Next, we sort of get into a few orals, um, which is there's quite a few in the DHT family, and some fun ones too. And probably the two most widely used in strength sports, both the first one, definitely the most widely introductory drug for females, and then definitely the most utilized and abused drug in strength work the world for men as well. The first one is Anavar, which is You hear about Anavar only cycles. You hear about it's most females' first introduction to drugs because it's not injectable and it's easy to access for the most part. Obviously, still a little bit. It shouldn't be faked that much. I feel like it is relatively reliable, but definitely still
Yeah,
is. Um, but also used a lot with men, right? In
yeah,
terms of like strength, uh, good increases in strength, managing, especially for athletes that are weight class based, in terms of like looking for output, a lower cost drug, like from a side effect standpoint, not quite as beneficial as like an Anadrol, but manages your weight a lot better, right? Less water retention, especially for weight class athletes. Talk to me a little bit, Anavar.
yeah. I quite like Anavar. I do think it's kind of underrated for men. I think the
I agree.
cost to reward ratio of
Yeah.
Anavar can be pretty good.
Yeah, I feel like
Um,
the cost and the side effect profile to the amount of benefit that's actually can be gained is quite good for and like
yeah,
especially for men. There's not, I mean, obviously there's a reasonable amount of like liver toxicity that comes with it, but like pretty good outcomes and you can run it a little bit longer. The cost is definitely not quite as high, but like good outcomes across the board for men, I think, as well. So I definitely
yeah.
think underutilized for men as well. But continue on, please. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, very versatile compounds can fit into a lot of different situations. I'm not usually a huge fan of much in the way of oral use outside of contest prep, but it is one that could have small spot duties in the off season.
Yeah.
Um, it does have quite high collagen synthesis benefits. It's a drug that's prescribed in burns cases and stuff of that nature. So, in terms of actually driving up wound healing, um, there is some unique benefits to Anavar
Yeah.
that other drugs don't have. Um, Pretty harsh on lipid profiles as most orals are, but that's probably one of the biggest drawbacks with Anavar is the skewing of lipid panels. Liver toxicity is there, but it's considerably less than most other
Yeah.
orals.
Yeah.
It's one that you could certainly, as you mentioned, probably push out a little bit longer, and the total milligrams can probably be a little higher than most other orals as well. Obviously, being DHT, it doesn't aromatize. It also doesn't really have much in the way of anti-estrogenic properties like some of your other DHTs. It's
Mm.
it's kind of more just a neutral compound.
Yeah.
It has a little bit of interaction with the glucocorticoid receptor, so it's able to bind and kind of partially block cortisol's impact on the glucocorticoid receptor, allowing it to have a anti-catabolic effect and maybe a very, very mild fat loss effect. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up for the most part.
Cool. So we've got do you want to just give us like if we're in terms of shopping for characteristics, like what are give us like the top five reasons why we'd be taking Anavar from a characteristic standpoint.
For me, number one in strength-based sports is probably going to be its impact on collagen. It's a very nice byproduct to have when you're slinging heavy weights around in the
Yep.
room.
Yep.
Um, low side effect. I think it still has a fairly good. I think the kind of the pre-training ergogenic effects of Anavar are still relatively good, especially when you're kind of up in that 50 plus milligram
Yep.
range pre-training. You still get a little bit of an aggression drive.
Yep.
Obviously, on the female side of things, it's got a low androgenic side effect profile. Um, and yeah, just another estrogen neutral compound would be kind of
Yep.
the main things I'd be looking at there.
Love it. Key things or side effects that we want to be conscious of that may be undesirable. Lipid profile being the number one, which is like one of the blood work considerations that we'll talk about. Any other key side effects that we would want to be conscious of?
Yeah, obviously a little bit of liver toxicity, especially if abused for too long.
Yeah.
Blood pressure, uh, maybe some mild gut disruptions if you're sensitive to some of the orals on the stomach, but it tends to be that quite rare. Indigestion can be a side effect. Typically not as bad with Anavar, but a lot of orals can carry some kind of
Yeah, sure.
indigestion side effects.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that would be about it.
Yeah. For females, things just to be conscious of would be like our normal markers, right? So obviously
Yep.
just this is probably one of those ones where I think like men are going to get good use out of this, and they definitely like Anavar is definitely a key drug that will still be used. But I think females are like, this is the one, right? Like
Yeah.
this is the first one that like I reckon 90% of females that I hear of who have tried using an anabolic compound or performance drug, it'll be clenbuterol or this.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So things to look out for as a female taking Anavar, like early signs or early things that they can sort of be aware of in terms of side effects that they can go like, okay, cool, like this is happening, this is kind of fine, or like, oh, okay, I need to pull up here.
Yeah, pretty much the same main sexual sides, kind of clitoral enlargement is probably one of the
Yeah.
first things that would be noted. Obviously, cessation of their menstrual cycle, um, unwanted body hair growth,
Yeah.
just kind of your general masculinizing side effects for the most part.
Yeah.
Females often tend to use it a fair bit longer as well,
Mhm.
so lipid profiles can become quite deranged even at the lower doses that they take after a large duration.
Mhm.
And I think one other thing is a lot of females get married to Anavar and they're at the point in their career where they're pushing doses a little bit higher, and now they're taking 30 or 40 milligrams of Anavar a day. And I think when you're
Yeah.
getting to that point, it's time to look for another compound.
Yeah, for sure. Or spread the love.
Yeah,
There's
definitely.
other ways to get the outcomes that are probably going to be safer,
Yeah,
and probably less impactful across the board on like virilization, but also your health markers, right? So it's
for
kind of
sure.
like there's an up threshold where it's like, yes, you can, but there's better ways to go about it. But
Yeah, definitely.
I think like a lot of people, a lot of females get stuck where an oral is very comfortable. It's like, when you play footy and the guy takes the fucking Anavar or Dianabol cycle by itself, like it's
Yeah,
dumb overall. Like it's not the best fucking
yeah,
move. But you know what? Like he's not going to go put a needle in his arm or his ass, is he? Do you know what I mean? Like he's not that guy. So I think it's kind of like it's comfortable and it's probably uncomfortable taking that next step. But it's if you're doing that from a health perspective, it's going to be healthier to go the other route or
yeah.
getting
Especially
towards.
if you're doing longer cycles.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Uh, blood work considerations, I think we are pretty covered on very similar. Like the lipid profile is definitely the biggest one. We're gonna uh have to note some of that like liver side of stuff. We're not gonna have as much impact on the estradiol to look at. It's gonna be more neutral, like we sort of talked about. Anything else that you think is going to
Yeah.
be particular to the Anavar?
Probably just the collagen,
Yeah,
really. But aside from that, I don't think there's really too much else to it.
yeah, cool. Uh Levers are going to be fine. Key dosages for men.
Again, because it is quite a versatile drug, I think there is a fair dosing range here.
Yeah.
I think even with men, as little as 10 milligrams can be used if it's simply in there as a background collagen aid.
Yeah.
Like I used 10 to 20 milligrams of Anavar a day through the majority of my shoulder rehab.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Um, as a pre-workout, if you're using it as like a primary oral and a comp prep, I think doses can kind of go up around that 100 milligram mark. Again, that wouldn't be a daily dose. Typically, that's kind of a bolus pre-training dose.
Yeah.
And then, even on comp day, maybe 200 milligrams for a one-off comp day dose.
Yep. And a female, sort of like we talked about this the other week as well, like 2.5 milligrams, even starting off as low as that, um, in
Yep.
the lower threshold. Where's your up threshold before you think people should be looking at other drug options as well?
I think by the time you're at 20, I think you probably should definitely be looking at other things. And again, duration comes back to that. If you're only cycling for 8-week preps, then maybe you can get away with Anavar for longer. But if you're using, Anavar throughout your entire off season into prep, you probably don't want to be on an oral compound that's a little harsher,
Not that long.
for 9 months of the year.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Also, just like the difference between taking 3 to 5 milligrams of testosterone and 1 milligram of MPP or something like a day and getting the outcomes from that to 70 milligrams of Anavar. Do you know what I mean? If you're taking even just 10 milligrams or 140 milligrams, it's a big bump up in total anabolic load.
It's even more than that because obviously there's ester involved with the injectables.
Yes.
There's no ester involved with the Anavar. So
Yeah. So it's something just to consider as well, but obviously that is going to be like one of the key ones that like that's probably the big one I think like for females if they are listening, which will be a smaller minority, but I think that's probably one of those key ones like the key drugs. What do you think that the key drugs are like a female will be focused around? Like testosterone, Anavar, Primobolan, MPP. Is there anything else like on the actual anabolic side that you think are going to be bigger players or key players for females?
um, not really those in kind of your normal category of performance enhancing drug use.
Mm.
Obviously, when you
Yeah.
start getting into
Leverage
the
other
elite
stuff.
side,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's actually, yeah, actually, yeah, where you're going with that, definitely. I think, you know, the non-androgenic compounds are probably, a good idea for the females to look into on that side of things. But yeah,
Mm.
not
And
too
so
much
like
else.
so when we're talking, like just bearing that in mind, if you are a female listening, like much of these are kind of like okay, but probably not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like unless you've got great supervision with someone who definitely knows what they're talking about or doing, and you're pretty fucking cool with whatever fucking happens. Do you know what I mean? Like, I got
yeah,
a friend who's in the like powerlifting and she's fucking rad. Like I love talking because she's like, I've done it, got a kid, done the thing. Like I just want to be fucking strong as shit. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like send it, and that's great, but it's just not going to be everyone, right?
yeah, exactly.
Anadrol.
Lovely.
This is like, I mean, this is the drug, right? Like if you're a strength
Yeah,
sport athlete, like this is the one. This is the one
yeah.
that's in your gym bag, right? Um, talk to me about Anadrol.
Yep. So DHT derived compound, but
Mhm.
one of those DHTs that has a little bit of a different kind of profile to the majority of the others from that family. It doesn't aromatize or aromatize, but it does tend to have some kind of estrogenic-like activity, whether that be through there's speculations on different mechanisms of action to how it has that kind of estrogenic activity because it actually can't aromatize and form
Yeah.
estrogen or any estrogenic metabolites. It may be some progesterone receptor interaction, or potentially some people even speculate direct binding to the estrogen receptor of the anadrol actually directly having an affinity for the estrogen receptor.
Mhm.
But that's all internet speculation.
Conjecture,
There's
yeah.
really no kind of definitive.
Yeah.
Um, Very, very strong acute effects. Tends to have less impact or potentially even no impact directly on the androgen receptor, and a lot of acute kind of the neurological side of things being a big driver with Anadrol.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think any strength athlete that's taken a decent amount pre-training understands very, very well how Anadrol feels.
Mhm.
Um, Quite a strong driver on red blood cell count. It is used in anemia cases within the medical industry.
Yeah.
It's probably actually even more potent than equipoise. It's just that you're probably not going to run Anadrol for 16 weeks to see, the side effects of that. Um, yeah, it's a strength drug for sure. Also very anabolic. Has a fair bit of use within bodybuilding and hypertrophy. It's not something I would use really within an off season unless other than maybe like maybe a pre-workout session at the last week of a mesocycle before you
Mhm.
hit that kind of last lift before a deload. That might be the only kind of off season use I'd have for it. But otherwise, I think it's pretty strictly a pre-comp drug.
And it really can be something that like it's not like not advocating for this, but it really can be like if it's in your gym bag, it's like I've got a heavy session.
Yeah,
It's an immediate acute effect on your neurological output. So it
100%.
it doesn't have to be in there for 6 weeks for it to accrue and hit like a peak saturation or whatever you think. Like it's not like that. It's like I've got to start at 4 weeks out for my prep or for my peak. It's like there is an acute, very acute neurological response that increases your power output. So it can
Yeah,
be like an off, like, oh, I've got a fucking heavy session, or I'm gonna go training with the boys and I've got a fucking deadlift night. Like oh look, I've got a couple in my bag. I might just fucking sling those before I go out. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
And
agreed.
that's how quick the window that it works is in, right? Essentially.
Yeah.
Timeline before training, an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Um, Depends. Honestly, anywhere from about 45 minutes for me. Also
Interesting.
depending,
Yeah.
obviously depending on warm up and stuff. But for a
Yeah.
comp, like if I'm looking at a comp, I'm probably timing it for about 60 minutes before my last warm up,
Cool.
round
Yep.
about there. Yeah.
Yep. Great. I was going to put that into 60 minutes before last warm up. Anywhere between 45 to maybe 90 minutes pre-training.
Yep.
Cool. Bang, bang. Uh, Side effects.
Yeah. So, especially in men, it is quite notorious for blood noses. It's a side effect of kind of driving up red blood cell count and blood pressure.
Yeah. Just the red
It's yeah,
face, the red cheeks, living with like a little bit of like that red hue
yeah,
while using as well. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, again, the kind of estrogen-like, almost debol-ish kind of effects of it, despite not actually aromatizing, it tends to cause a fair bit of water retention in
Yeah.
some people.
Yeah.
Some people can run it and have very minimal water retention, especially if they're lean.
Yeah.
And I think it also comes down to kind of the remainder of the stack and kind of other aromatizable
Yeah, sure.
compounds in there as well.
Yeah.
Um, Relatively liver toxic, though, like kind of thing I mentioned last week, there have been some studies on it at some pretty high doses. I'd have to go back and have a look just to confirm what they were, but we're talking in the hundreds of milligrams for months on end. And there were very notable liver enzyme elevations, but not by no means catastrophic. And this is like, again, I think it was like 16 weeks, 200 milligrams or something like that.
Yeah. So like a
Um,
long time and a lot. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, toxic, but probably not the most toxic
Yeah.
oral that you could possibly take.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of just it's a all-round side effect as kind of all your general areas. Your renin, aldosterone, system's going to get impacted fairly hard. Uh, Probably going to have a little bit of kidney toxicity, or not necessarily kidney toxicity, but because it tends to drive up blood pressure, if that's not managed, then kidneys can become an issue. Obviously, the liver, it is going to be rough on lipid panels as well.
Yeah.
And some people,
Appetite, indigestion is probably a big one. Like appetite drops. That's probably one of the ones that I
yeah,
probably most notable. And like I sort of find it
definitely.
like my appetite doesn't really, it's not too bad. Reflux, which we talked about a little while ago, like a
Reflux,
reflux or
yeah,
like to the point where you know how we're talking about like, oh well, like if you're getting a cork, like it impacts your training. It's like sometimes like I'll get reflux if I've used it. Like I just have to stop. Like I can't use it because my reflux is
yeah,
bad. I put my belt on. I can't fucking deadlift. You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah,
uncomfortable straight afterwards.
yeah. You
So
just burping,
um,
yeah,
yeah, it's just like it just fucking hurts. It's uncomfortable. So yeah, that's definitely one of the ones where I sort of notice the most is and
yeah,
that can be supply dependent. I don't know
yeah. You
whether
can also get injectable Anadrol, which can help, but that tends to be brewed in nasty solvents, so
yeah,
you would want to check that.
and obviously like there's dietary considerations and stuff there as well, like depending on like what you're doing and like there's obviously other leaves that you can pull if you are experiencing some of that and you do really want to have it in there.
A lot of people tend to run Cialis as well alongside these compounds as a blood pressure medication, which also doubles pretty hard on the reflux side effects.
Yeah,
So a lot of people get compounding effects there without realizing it.
what's going on? Yeah. Half-life is obviously just like it's short, sharp.
Yeah, 8 to 10 hours, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. 8 to 10 hours. And like we said, like it's going to be administered sort of like that 45 to 90 minutes pre-training. Uh, and then blood work considerations. I think we've pretty much covered most of those, like in those side effects, like probably like hematocrits and RBC, like your red blood count and stuff like
Yep.
that. Probably one of those bigger ones for this.
Yeah,
Uh,
and platelets as well.
yeah. So platelets, hematocrits, and RBC, probably like one of those bigger factors that you just need to be conscious of. And then like your general health markers, like blood pressure is probably going to be one that you
Yep.
just want to keep an eye on as well.
Yep.
Then the rest is pretty much normal, right? Like lipid profile, like any oral lipid profile, like your liver toxicity, et cetera, et cetera. All
Yep.
those markers are going to be important. Anything else that you really see, like for me, I think that like the platelets, hematocrits, like RBC is going to be the biggest like key one that's independent or primary to Anadrol.
Yep. Yep. yeah, it's kind of most of the side effects a lot of your other ones carry just heightened. It's one of those ones that does have quite a high payout, but it also has a high cost as well.
This is, yeah, Anavar versus Anadrol is why I like this conversation because it's like we talked about, it's like it's still high benefit, but lower benefit, lower cost, right?
Yep.
Like it's a safer, more mild drug that still has good payout. It's just that Anadrol has a fucking great payout, but it's just going to cost, right?
Yep,
That's
definitely.
that's all there is to it. So with that, like specifically with Anadrol, with the platelets and hematocrits and the red blood cell count, anything that we can do to mitigate some of that if we know that we're going to be taking Anadrol?
Yep. Like if if blood pressure is an issue, incorporating something like an ARB
Yep.
or an ACE inhibitor to control the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, impacts of the anadrol can definitely help a
Yep.
lot, controlling blood pressure and also controlling the water retention from it a little bit as well. Um, some of these drugs can also, such as telmisartan, can also have a little bit of a lowering impact on hematocrit and hemoglobin and red blood cell count. Um, it's one, if you are prone to this, if you're someone who's got like hemochromatosis, it's probably a drug that's not the best for you. Obviously, someone with iron overload who's susceptible to kind of overproduction of red cells in the first place, probably not going to want to use much anadrol, if any at all. Um, but yeah, that'd be the kind of the main parts, I'd say.
Key dosages for, I mean, men. We'll just roll with men. I mean, if a female wants to take it on comp day, fucking power to you, you definitely can. But like, it's going to be key dosages for primarily males, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
Key dosages pre-training.
If it's pre-training only, somewhere between 50 and 200, with 200 being very short at the back end of a kind of maybe last heavy sessions of a prep.
Do you feel like there's like a tipping point there, like where it's like the benefit starts to like drop, or do you think just like it does get exponentially better with more?
Look,
Yeah.
I definitely noticed 200 more than 100.
Yeah.
I mean, like I eat a fair few Anadrol on comp day, and I really can't say that I notice a huge amount over 200.
Mhm.
Like I might go through 400 on comp day,
Yeah. Okay.
split up throughout the day.
Yeah.
But I really couldn't objectively say that 400 is a hell of a lot better than 200.
Mm.
But from what 100 to 200, like there's definitely a
Interesting.
considerable difference. Yeah.
Hmm.
For me, anyway, Anadrol is one of my personal favorites. Obviously, everyone's still going to have to kind of profile different compounds and see what works for them.
Yeah.
But for me, it's one that I can push quite high. I don't get blood noses. I don't get anything like that.
I've just
So
never pushed it, but I always sort of felt like with some of those drugs like a halotestin or Anadrol, I felt like already being quite like an aggressive lifter. Like I just feel like there's probably like a tipping point where maybe more is not as good, but like maybe not. Maybe I'm
I
spitting.
think when I was younger, the same. I think my methods for regulating my arousal and emotion on comp day have gotten to a point where I can switch things on and off.
Yep.
Where when I was younger, I was
You're heightened
just
the
up
whole
here
time.
all
Yeah.
comp day, and I probably was not the right thing for me
Yeah.
at that stage of my career.
There's a couple in here that it's not that I want to skim past, but like obviously our focus is like strength athletes primarily. Like a Winstrol, for example, like we're not really going to be prescribing Winstrol for a strength athlete, right? Um,
Look, it is terrific directly for strength, but the joint side effects are horrendous. I
yeah.
have
So
attempted to use it, and it's just not worth it.
you notice it that much, even like if you mitigate it with like some other compounds, like you're running like an MPP or like Deca, where it's going to be like joint pro, like pro joint versus like a Winstrol, which is going to be like con joint. Like
Yeah.
you notice it that much.
I did, yeah. I haven't used it since I was young, but the two times I used it when I was younger, it was the same thing within a couple of weeks. It was just my knees were sore, and
Yeah.
yeah, and this was in an off-season phase as well. So
Yeah.
I wasn't
Uh,
super lean and wasn't moving super huge loads.
Real quickly, key characteristics that we would want it for.
It does have some impacts on the mineral cortico system and fluid dynamics, so you can get a little bit of a like kind of diuretic-like effect
Yeah.
from it. Very, very lean drug, so weight class sports tends to be quite popular in things like sprinting.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, as far as the strength-based stuff, there's really not too many characteristics that I can
Side effects that we wouldn't
say are
want:
beneficial.
joint soreness.
Joint soreness, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Half-life.
About the same. I think it's
Yeah,
80-ish hours.
hours administered daily anyway. You know what? I reckon I'm just going to key dosages.
Uh, Look, it's one that is slightly more female friendly. I wouldn't still call it female friendly, so it could be a consideration for some females at like 10 milligrams in strength side of things that there may be some application there. For men, again, I just don't think there's really an application in strength sports, but
Yeah, I don't think
bodybuilding,
this
maybe
either.
30 to 100 milligrams.
Yeah. Uh, the next one, actually, okay, let's skip ahead one. I'm going to go back to it because the next one's a little bit more mild on my sheet. Is one that is unreasonably popular in my opinion, and not only that, you get like the fucking Goliath pill, which has got like 20% Anadrol, 30% Superdrol, and 50% some other fucking like I don't know, pressing something into a pill. Superdrol.
Yeah, toxic shit. If I'm not mistaken, I actually believe Superdrol is C17 alpha alkylated version of Masteron.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But yet obviously the actual effect of Masteron versus Superdrol are two polar opposite drugs.
So
Um,
why? So characteristically, why would we want to use Superdrol, or why do you think that people choose to use Superdrol over the other ample options that they have?
Look, it is very potent. And I do know some people that just absolutely swear by it.
Yeah,
There
so do
is
I.
one X 140 kilo world record holder powerlifter who prescribes it quite heavily,
Yeah.
and for a long period of time as well. So I can only assume that was incorporated in
Me too.
his
Yeah.
own
Yeah.
routines. Yeah, like I've used it when I was younger. For me, every single time by about 2 weeks in, I would get lethargic. I'd get like a sore throat.
Yeah, like
And most of the
two
people I
weeks.
spoke to got the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2 weeks is probably the top, right? Potent, working on similar pathways as like an Anadrol, just like a strong neurological driver, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. Uh, any other key characteristics that we would be taking it for besides like immediate or acute power output neurologically?
Um, Kind of similar to Anadrol, and it doesn't aromatize, but it can have a little bit of a water retentive effect, but not on everyone. Tends to bring a fair amount of glycogen retention around. Um, I do still think there's probably application in strength sports if you are one of the people that tolerate it.
Yeah.
And I think that perhaps if I had used orals the way I use them now when I was younger, that maybe it would have been more tolerable. Back then, I used to
Or like
use orals.
pre-training.
Well, yeah. So yeah, if I only use it pre-training, I think potentially now it's could be a little bit more viable, though it's probably still not something I'd mess around with,
Yeah.
just because I have a combination that I know works quite well for me. But
Yeah.
yeah, back when I'd use it, I was splitting it up throughout the day and taking it every day, which I think probably exacerbated the side
Yeah.
effects. Um,
If
yeah,
someone
it's
is choosing to use it, blood work considerations, like very similar probably to Anadrol, but maybe a little bit different in terms of like liver and lipid profiles.
yeah. So I would say it's considerably more liver toxic.
Yeah,
Probably less impact on red blood cell count.
yeah,
But yeah, the liver toxicity I think is considerably higher than that of
yeah.
Anadrol.
Probably
Yeah,
milk
look,
thistle is going to cut it.
there is a reason why. So Superdrol was brought out as a steroid. It was kind of thrown away on the back burner, and then it reemerged in the pro hormone era or the designer
Yeah,
steroid era, where they started bringing out all these old shitty steroids that
yeah,
didn't make it past any of the
yeah,
pharmaceutical kind of parameters,
and then
and
kind of stuck.
yeah, and then it stuck.
Key dosages.
Look, if you're going to use it, I would say somewhere between 10 and 30 milligrams
Yeah,
pre-training, 2 to 3 weeks tops,
yeah,
maybe probably not a terrible comp day drug. I know quite a few females that have used it on a
Yeah.
comp day only
Yeah.
scenario.
Especially like
But
milligrams for output as well. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like 50 to 100 milligrams of Anadrol, 10 to 30 milligrams of Superdrol, just in terms of like total milligrams managed.
yeah. If you want to just say you're on a really low total milligrams, so that people be like, "Nah, bro, I'm only on 200
Yeah,
milligrams of
yeah.
Superdrol a week."
Yeah. Yeah. The next one in the DHT family is one I've used more as like it's an ancillary. It's probably more so like an ancillary drug. And kind of has a little bit of popularity as like an all year round drug in maybe bodybuilding more so, but Proviron.
I have very little experience with Proviron. I've never personally used it, never personally recommended it.
Yep.
Um, for me, the application is probably more on the lifestyle side of things, fertility, sex drive,
Yep.
um, maybe mild endogenous hormone optimization, as it can lower sex hormone binding globulin and have minimal impacts on total testosterone if dosed correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, not something I see a ton of application for within
It's an interesting
my
one.
kind of, yeah, you're right.
No, I was
You
gonna say
go.
it's an interesting one because I was like researching stuff and looking at a few other guys and on forums and stuff, and a lot of guys putting it in as just like a I'm running a cycle, I'm running Proviron. Do you know what I mean? I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I'll chuck it in. And it was interesting. Like, I didn't notice, probably didn't notice too much and notice too much of my blood work. Obviously, it has like an impact on like SHB and stuff like that as well, which is one of the big reasons why people use it. And like, libido is never really an issue for me on site. Like, it's not something I've ever had to come up with. So I've never
Yeah,
seen, so I don't notice a difference there. So I was
yeah,
just kind of like, well, I'm just kind of spending money on an ancillary drug that I'm running a low 40 milligram dose of that's not really making any impact, right? So
yeah.
would you see, so from a characteristic standpoint, would you see there is a reason in blood work where someone would choose to maybe run an ancillary dose of Provine along with their cycles if they're maybe particular certain things, or do you think there's other better options there?
I just use Masteron. Proviron's effectively just oral Masteron,
Cool.
and there's pretty much nothing that Proviron does that I don't think Masteron can do. So
Cool. Well, let's leave it there. Like I don't think there's much point. Like if you don't think there's like a worthwhile
I,
compound,
I
like
just I also don't have enough experience with it,
yeah,
but from yeah, that's where my current personal stance is on it.
love it. DHB, relatively new or like gaining popularity, I think, like relatively new, but
Gaining
also gaining
popularity, yeah,
popularity. Especially in the strength world. Hey,
yeah.
seemingly so. Uh, give us the rundown.
Yep. So DHB is a weird one when it comes to the family tree because it's technically a derivative of testosterone, but that's then but been 5-alpha reduced into the dihydra form. So it's 5-alpha reduced boldenone. Quite toxic. I believe it has a fairly high degree of liver toxicity. It is available in an oral form as well. Um, expensive, hard to find, hurts to inject. Um, I have done a few consults with a few big people that absolutely swear by it. I know
Yeah,
Broderick's also a big fan of it.
yeah.
Look, I used it. I think I used it during the prep for the first 800 kilo total I did when I was 18.
Yeah.
I think maybe 50 milligrams a day I used of it.
Uh-huh.
Um, look, I did well at the comp. I've never used it since. It's really difficult to find. Some of the blood work I have seen on it has not been great, but I haven't seen a ton of blood work on it. And the people
Yeah.
that I have seen are usually not in Australia.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's honestly, it's probably a compound that not enough people have access to really even,
Have too much
know what
data
to do
on
with it.
or experience.
Yeah,
And I know guys who've used it here. I had a guy come on board who was like, I've had two clients who have like been like relatively good proponents of it. Like they came on and that's what they were using. And I was like, okay, cool. Like that's cool if that's what you have used previously and like, but I'm certainly not going to be putting it on a piece of paper. Like I don't know enough about it. Do you know what I mean? And I know
yeah,
that it's quite toxic and it's a relatively harsh option
yeah.
from like a drug standpoint. What characteristics or why would we choose it?
It's relatively dry. It does tend to drive up strength quite well. It's quite anabolic as well. Um, uh, Acetylcholine side of things also seems to be fairly heavily upregulated.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, look, I don't think it's hugely applicable for most people. And if it is used, I think it's a prep only drug for maybe 6 or 8 weeks. I don't
yeah,
think it's
short time.
much, yeah.
Daily administration.
Uh, you can get different esters of the DHB, I think. Um, I can't even remember what ester I used, so obviously it would depend on the ester, but
Yeah.
yeah, probably daily.
And like blood work considerations, obviously we talked about that, like high liver toxicity,
Yep.
is probably
For an
like,
injectable, definitely. Anyway,
yeah, it's probably one of the
yeah.
biggest ones, I think, is like looking at that, like liver toxicity is probably one of the key ones. Um,
Kidneys as well.
and kidneys, yeah, cool. So liver, kidneys, and then kick dosages for DHB if you're going to run it.
Again, not a huge amount of experience with it. I'm pretty sure the one time I ran it was at 50 milligrams a day. Um, the consults I've done with people using it have all been around about that 300 milligram mark.
A week.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't be taking my advice on it, but from what I've seen, around about that 300 milligram a week mark seems to be about the norm.
Yeah. Love it. Uh, I've got four in the 19 Nor family, which we're gonna rip through. Not rip through. These are like, on the back end of the DHT family. I think these are probably the more applicable ones to the listeners. Another few favorites here from a strength athlete standpoint, and the favorite if you're a powerlifter. um, Number one is Nandrolone or Deca. Um,
Yep.
Key characteristics. Why are we choosing to put Deca in a cycle as a strength athlete, sir?
Okay, so I'll back up a little bit. So
Mm,
19 nortestosterone is nandrolone. A lot of people don't realize that, but
yeah,
the chemical name for 19 nortestosterone is nandrolone. So the family of 19 north steroids are all based off the nandrolone molecule
yeah,
or DECA. Um, Nandrolone, if we're talking about DECA, tends to be fairly water retentive. Um,
mhm,
Drives up a good amount of collagen synthesis, highly anabolic. Uh, it does 5-alpha reduce, but 5-alpha reduces into a weaker androgen that has little impact on stuff like the hairline. So in terms of those androgenic side effects, it tends to be lower. If you're someone who's concerned with
yeah,
your hair, Deca is one that's a safer compound to
yeah.
use.
And just quickly, like
Um,
the water retention thing is actually like some people like that water retention. Just FY,
yeah,
like we're mentioning that in like the desired characteristics, but like that it actually is it can be a desirable or undesirable trait of the drug, just as we sort of know.
most of the time people are using nandrolone. That is one of the primary, in my opinion, it's probably one of the primary desired outcomes of the drug. That's the primary reason I incorporate around about
Mm.
300 milligrams in most of my cycles.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, being fairly lean and still relatively strong, I wish I had some nandrolone in my cycle right now because my knees and shit are just like could
Would
do
be
with some
taking.
more fluid
Yeah.
on them
Yeah.
from being quite lean.
So collagen synthesis obviously doesn't reduce or reduces to a weaker version of that,
Yep.
like and like an androgen side of thing. So like little impact on the hairline. So that's nice. Bit of raw attention. Other key aspects from a strength athlete standpoint, like why are we using Deca?
It does also aromatize roughly about 1/5 the rate of testosterone, so you'll get a little bit of estrogen conversion from it,
Yeah,
but it does tend to give like a heightened estrogenic side effect profile.
yeah,
It does also have an interaction with the progesterone receptor, so you get some progesterone activity from your nandrolones. I think
yeah.
it's around about a 22% binding affinity. Um, there is also a little bit of glucocorticoid receptor action from nandrolones, as there is with some DHTs as well, or just with most DHTs. So you can, especially with the Trenbolone, but we'll leave that for a little bit. You can have some of the kind of blunting some of the negative effects of cortisol.
Mhm.
Um, I think it has a modest strength profile, but it's not something that really tends to drive up kind of the acetylcholine pathway or aggression or anything of that nature. I think the main benefits from a strength athlete come from that little bit of fluid, synovial fluid, and maybe the altering of leverages that come from the little bit of extra fluid on the body,
Being a
allowing
big
you to lift more
boy.
load. Yeah,
Yeah, sick.
definitely.
Key side effects that we would want to be mindful of when taking Deca.
Probably the most common are going to be sexual side effects, most likely related to the progesterone activity, along with some of the estrogenic activity of the nandrolone. Obviously, the water retention on it can, as you've mentioned, be an undesirable effect. Can have quite a harsh impact on blood pressure if it's not managed. Um, Also can just be cosmetically quite unappealing. It can be quite extreme in some people. You get really puffy face and edematous ankles and stuff like that,
Roll
which
beard,
is not
bro.
healthy. That'll be yeah, yeah,
Say
yeah.
goodbye to the line. Yeah.
There is some studies that suggest that nandrolone would possibly be worse on cardiovascular tissue modeling, or at least there's some claims
Mhm.
being made on this. I don't particularly buy into it. I think it's more the fact that there is a lack of evidence on other androgenic steroids causing negative cardiac tissue modeling
Sure. Yeah.
rather than it just being the DECA cause it. I just think the fact it's just, we haven't really studied all the other commonly used androgens
Yeah.
within kind of the performance enhancing drug
Yeah.
world to actually be able to say, yeah, DECA causes more. There's just not enough information there to make that claim.
Yeah.
But
Makes
it is
sense.
something you probably see on social media a bit at the moment. Um, Having said that, I still don't believe, and I have in the past, and I probably wouldn't do it if I had my time again. I don't think nandrolone's a compound for most people that you want to be pushing super high.
Hmm.
Um, I think most of the benefits that you can get from nandrolone kind of top out at around about 400 milligrams for most people. Um, yeah, I think it's a nice little additive to a cycle. It's not something I would use as your main kind of milligram driver, but it's a nice add-on effect for a lot of cycles.
Interesting. Half-life of Deca. Oh, like injection frequency.
Half-life's I think like 19 days or something of that nature. It's
Quite long.
pretty long. Injection frequency you get away with once or twice a week. Obviously depending on the total volume.
Uh,
Yeah.
Blood work considerations. Things that we might look out for specifically with the Deca.
Um, Look, obviously it does have a small amount of aromatizable capacity, so obviously keeping an eye on the estrogen levels. Maybe a little bit of prolactin related issues, if mainly if estrogen is kind of let run
Yeah.
wild, you may run into some prolactin based issues as well. Um, but for the most part, it's pretty standard kind of side effect
Yeah.
profile.
Sure.
No,
Um,
no major liver toxicity or anything of that
no,
nature.
pretty relaxed. And then like major key dosages for men. So you sort of said like topping out at 400 in terms of like the benefits, but obviously like people will push that. So lower threshold, upper threshold.
Look, being generous, I'd probably say 1 to 600 milligrams, but I think most are going to be probably in that 3 to 400. I think
Female.
it's something that uh, I rarely would suggest nandrolone decanate to females purely because of the half-life and the lack of ability to abort if there's side effect. But nandrolone phenylpropanate, which is a slightly shorter ester, it's not that much shorter actually. A lot of people think it's significantly shorter. It's only a few days half-life different.
Interesting.
I think it's the phenylpropionate's slightly shorter than an enanthate ester. It's not. I think a lot of people think it's more like a propionate ester, but
Yeah.
it's more like a somewhere between kind of a propionate and an enanthate.
Yeah.
Um, Females 15, maybe up to 50 milligrams on the kind of upper range of your females
Mhm.
that have consideration for remaining feminine.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think it's probably a slightly underrated drug for females,
Yeah.
especially as you kind of get into that menopausal stage
Mhm.
of a
Yeah.
female's life where progesterone and estrogenic activity drops off.
And then nandrolone phenylpropionate. So Trade name NPP.
Yep.
Uh, Differences, key differences, like in terms of desired attributes, we would probably say much the same as above.
Much the same. I do believe the longer half-life of nandrolone actually leads to a slightly higher level of nitrogen retention. So nandrolone decanate may actually be slightly more anabolic in theory.
Okay.
Because the changing half-lives and delivery mechanisms of drugs can change the pharmacokinetics of pharmacodynamics. So it's not necessarily the exact same. Like, for example, obviously, you look at some of the oral and injectable versions, and they're pretty much the exact same drug. Like, for example, Dynabol and equipoise. Both Dynavol's effectively oral equipoise, but you're getting two absolutely
Totally
polar
different
different
jobs. Yeah.
drugs. But yeah, there's probably not too much else.
Yep. So
Yeah.
the decanate, like Deca as we know it versus MPP, potentially or likely to be more anabolic than MPP.
Yes, I think realistically, you're probably not going to see.
Yeah, yeah,
Look,
for
on
sure.
paper, it
That
should
outcome.
be. There's
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
not going to see the differences. And the other thing is obviously because the MPP is shorter, you are getting a slightly higher milligram of the active drug per milligram of total compound.
yeah. Mm.
And obviously, the faster half-life often gives you a faster onset of effects, which makes you kind of feel like it's maybe working more,
Yeah, sure.
because it's kind of come up very quickly. But yeah, in theory, Deca probably is slightly more anabolic than NPP.
Half-life and injection frequency for MPP every other day. Or but like you're
Yeah,
saying it's only
every other.
but it's only really 2 days difference, like half-life, right? So it's not really that much
I
difference.
think sorry, I think it's about 2 days difference from test-D. So I think it's probably something like a 7-ish day half-life,
Okay,
or
so
six
so
or
it is
seven day
quite
half-life.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So a reasonable difference.
Yeah.
Um,
I as far as the ester length goes, I think the half-life is about 8 or 9 days, or probably 7 or 8 days rather, but the ester weight of the drug. So obviously, when you take 100 milligrams, you get some of its ester and some of its
yeah,
drug. Normally, with those shorter esters, there is a lot more percentage of drug.
yeah,
With nandrolone phenylpropionate, I believe it's something like you get maybe like 66% drug as opposed to like 60. So
yeah,
there's not
okay.
actually a huge amount of or much less ester in the total milligram of the drug. Um, so I forgot where I was going with that.
No, it's fine. So and once again, just like a mild anabolic effect in terms of like key drivers for strength, we're not looking at the MPP or the Deca as the driver for strength. I know a lot of guys, including myself, as well, I've used this as like, well, Deca and MPP, like that's what you take to get strong, not the key driver.
I
On
don't think they're a key driver for expression of strength, but I do think they are a very valuable add-on into a strength-based cycle for
okay,
the kind of joint support
yeah.
and synovial fluid and whatnot.
Interesting. Great, fantastic. And the key dosages and stuff will be much the same there as well. So,
Yeah.
probably female dosages, would you say very similar as well? Probably the one thing that we go over. Because obviously we're going to optimize
Uh,
BP for a female versus like the like Deca most of the time. It's probably going to be
yeah.
the go-to, more easy to manage, easy to take out. Uh, Dosages for a female.
Yeah, somewhere in that kind of 12 to 50, 60 milligrams at the upper end for
Mm.
a, femininity conscious
Yep.
female.
Yep. Uh, Internet's favorite, Trenbolone.
Yeah.
Key desired attributes, or give us a bit of a spiel about Trenbolone because it is sitting under this Nandrolone family. Um, Key desired attributes and a little bit of history or background.
All right. Highly androgenic, fairly anabolic in comparison to testosterone. It's extremely anabolic. It has progesterol activity. It has quite a high affinity for the progesterone receptor. Um, Trenbolone does not aromatize, unlike nandrolone. So you don't get any estrogen conversion from the trenbolone. Uh, Trenbolone has probably the most potent interaction with the glucocorticoid receptor. over any of the other androgens. So it's effectively binding to the receptor that cortisol has most of its output on and occupying and effectively not allowing cortisol to have its impact.
Mhm.
So you get a small amount of fat loss through that, as well as anti-catabolism and muscle retention. So that's why it tends to be quite heavily favored in dieting situations. I believe there was a study done that showed around about 80 milligrams of Trenbolone a week to have an equivalent impact on the glucocorticoid receptor to about 300 milligrams of testosterone.
Yep.
Those numbers may be slightly out, but it's somewhere in that ballpark.
Yep.
Um, Definitely drives up acetylcholine quite tremendously. The aggression is extremely high on Trenbolone for most. Um, yeah, it's a potent drug. Lots of negative side effects as well, though.
Yeah, the way that we're describing that makes it sound like, well, it's there's a reason. There's a reason why, right? Like it's like
Yeah,
highly anabolic, highly fucking potent, great aggression, acetylcholine systems fucking on point. That all sounds fucking super positive, right? Or it sounds fun.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you didn't use it in your last one. I generally don't use it. Talk to me about the side effects. Talk to me about why we don't use. Talk to me like if it's so fucking good on paper, why do we not promote the use of it?
Yeah, so it is one of those drugs with a massive payout, massive cost. Um, Relatively kidney toxic, probably some very small amount of liver toxicity, harsh on blood pressure. For me personally, I cannot at all eat on it above kind of any modest intake of food.
Yeah.
Makes me throw up. I get terrible reflux, and
Oh,
yeah, it does not work with me with any kind of food. A lot of people get pretty severe derangements in sleep. Um, yeah, the irritability and mental side effects are probably the most notable on Trenbolone. Even like kind of sexual deviance and extremely heightened sexual arousal is quite commonly reported as well.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
Sure.
just about every side effect in the book it's got something of.
Which like that doesn't sound too bad, but it's like it changes the way that your brain thinks. Like
Yeah,
people talk about this and they go like, "Oh, I broke up with my missus on Tren, or I fucked up while I was on Tren." It's like, like it's kind of like a bit of a meme and it's a bit of a joke, but like it's no fucking joke. Like, and it's also
yeah,
neurotoxic. Please, another thing just to mention, like in terms of like long-term use, like it damages your fucking brain. Like
yeah,
if you value
yeah.
your
So it's one of
brain, sorry, go.
yeah. Yeah, so it's one of the steroids that crosses the blood-brain barrier quite readily, and it is a contributing factor to the buildup of beta amyloid plaque formations in the brain, which is a hallmark sign of Alzheimer's.
I'll come
So
with next
Trenbolone
precursor.
is almost certainly linked with what was that?
Yeah, I was gonna say with Alzheimer's, 100%.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Um, yeah, it's one of those ones where there's lots of people who do handle it well. There's lots of people who think they handle it well and don't understand. Or if you've been using the thing that I have trouble with, like strength athletes and drugs, is often we spend so long on them, or we've been using them for such a long time in our lives, on and off, or not on and off, that we start to forget what it's like when you're not using these drugs. Like it's like, oh, they don't impact my brain, they don't impact my thought patterns, they don't impact my behavior because it becomes normal, if that makes sense. Like it's I think like we get sort of like caught up and unless you're taking a significant time off sometimes or just being smarter with your drug choices, sometimes our normal gets skewed and it's not necessarily normal, right? And I think some of this the brain stuff and like behavioral stuff is definitely something that you you either don't think about or you shuffle aside often until you're in that hindsight moment where you realize that like, well, that actually was pretty wild. That's
Yep.
like thought patterns or remunerating on things or like obsession on things is very, very heightened or very, very unauthentically that person.
Yeah, you dwell on things so much more on the Trenbolone. Like that
Mm.
one thing that should have been just to forget about it and move on. It's one of those things that you just sit there and you play it over in your head and you're like, I should have done this, should have done that. Why didn't I do this? Was he disrespectful? Like it's just you just have unrational thoughts about things that you just otherwise would not even give a
Yeah.
second of attention to.
And like across the board here, so like we're talking about like appetite, no appetite, severe sleep was one thing that I noticed. Like my sleep is like dog shit. Like doesn't matter, like a small amount, large amount, like can't sleep, can't function. That's no good.
Yep. Yep.
Irritability, mine like it was like short fuse, like just noticing that like I'm not really like I'm a pretty fucking chill guy. Do you know what I mean? Like I just noticed my tolerance or fuse very quickly shortens. And I was like, oh, that's
Yep.
no, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like I'm angry. I'm not blowing up. I'm not like roid rage. Just like I get self-aware enough to go, huh, that's me being shorter with like how I'm communicating, or I'm just my fuse or my tolerance is just my window of tolerance went from like here to here. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, and I think that was probably the biggest one. But then, like anger depends on who you are. If you're an angry person, not an angry person, aggression can be good in the gym, but it's not great outside of it. The sexual deviancy, like people cheating on partners, people acting in ways they wouldn't otherwise do, people just entertaining thoughts, in that they wouldn't normally do while on that drug. Arousal, no one really ever complains about arousal, but like, like can be problematic in a relationship. If there's
Oh
a
yeah, for
if,
sure.
if there's a very big disparity between you and your partner in terms of arousal, well, then that can lead to very big problems, right?
Yep.
And then you're
Definitely.
toxic. So, like, I don't know, if you like appreciate remembering who you are, especially down the track, then it's probably an important one. So it's like,
Yep.
yeah, highly anabolic, highly potent, fucking amazing. Will fucking get you stronger. Will put on tissue. Will do all that stuff, but there's a cost. And then
Definitely.
it sounds like we're demonizing here on the other end, and maybe a little bit, but it's just, I think, like as an adult, it's understanding the cost and the benefit and understanding where that lies for you.
Yep. So I pushed Trenbolone relatively hard when I was young, and I reaped the benefits of it. It's definitely not something I would do again
Mhm.
if I had my time back. It's not a drug I can ever see myself using at high doses ever again. But look, it does do the things that actually I don't want to say that because I think still people over kind of give credit to Trend for what it does. I think it's a secret. It's no secret by any means. I know plenty of top level athletes that don't use it.
Of course.
Um, but
There's
it
other
does
mechanisms.
work very well.
Yeah.
There is no sugarcoating it. It does do what it's supposed to do extremely well.
Blood work considerations.
Again, it's just harsh across the board. Pretty much every single marker on blood work you're going to want to check. I don't think there's anything that you can really skimp on with Tren. One additional thing that I would say that may be worth checking is you can do an ApoE genotype blood test, which gives you some insight into what your likelihoods of developing something like an Alzheimer's would be. So an ApoE genotype may be worth getting done prior to using compounds like Trenbolone to potentially assess risk factors for some of those neurodegenerative diseases.
Key dosages.
Again, I think a very, very big dosing um, variance here. And I think the dosing range has gotten wider as of recent, with microdosing becoming a little bit more popular. Um, Anywhere from about 50 to look, 600 would be about my top end that I would say these days. I know plenty of people that have done 800, 1,000, 1,200, but just,
I know a particular strongman guy who swears on like low testosterone and like 2 grams of fucking Trent. Like,
yeah, well,
it just fucking blows my mind. But I think from memory, the highest that he ran was 3 grams a week.
fucking hell, dude. I went up to 800 milligrams for a very short period of time when I was young, and thought I was fucking pushing it hard then.
3 grams was
That's
from memory the
crazy.
most that
Fucking,
he had run, and like low testosterone, like it was like, 300-400 milligrams of testosterone, and just like then just drive the fucking tren up.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah.
But yeah, and just on a side note, like the low dose, like the 50 to 150 milligram per week, like as an ancillary amount, has actually become very, very popular. And I think if you are going to
Yeah.
do something like that, that is the way to do it, which would be, if you are going to use this drug, very mild, low dosages.
Yeah. I do actually like utilizing those microdoses. It's not something I really got into until recently in the last kind of year or so. Typically, when I'm microdosing Trenbolone with either myself or a client, it's more looking for that glucocorticoid receptor interaction. As obviously kind of mentioned with that study prior, you're able to get a pretty good impact on the glucocorticoid receptor with very small doses.
Yeah.
So, a very low dose during a dieting period for that benefit certainly has warrant. Even with certain clients that have large food demands and potential insulin sensitivity issues and insulin secretion issues, I've used small amounts of Tren with help with the glucose metabolism side of things. Trenbolone can also have some peculiar impacts on thyroid hormones as well. Some potential lowering of T3 can be seen in some people with Trenbolone as well.
Yeah. Uh, the last one on our list is Trestolone. Much like thoughts, much experience. Give us like a little bit of a rundown if so. Otherwise, we'll can roll through that pretty quickly, I think, to finish off.
Yeah, I've used Trest again when I was young. I liked it. It's probably something I would play around with again now, mainly due to the fact that I just don't deal with Trenbolone very well.
Yeah.
It's probably something I will run another experiment with in the next year or two.
Yeah.
Um, Very peculiar drug. It was originally produced as a male contraceptive.
Mm.
Um, Mildly efficacious, but nowhere near as efficacious enough as it needs to be
To be 100%.
contraceptive.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so on that, it's definitely not going to be a drug you're going to want to use if you're planning on cycling off
Yeah.
or fertility is a high concern for you.
Yeah.
Um, I don't believe it actually aromatizes, but it has extremely potent estrogenic-like activity. Um, Very heavy water retention. I believe there's still a fair amount of glucocorticoid receptor action. Um, I would almost call it like a wet tren,
Trend. Yeah. Cool. Interesting.
or or even like it's or super potent testosterone even.
Yeah. Okay. So like somewhere between that, like Deca trend, like some taking on some characteristics of both. Uh,
Yeah.
Interesting. Particular side effects that you'd probably want to look at with Trestolone, or does it fall much under these 19 Nor family side effects?
The estrogenic side effects are one that you're going to want to pay very close attention to, and that's something that's harder to control because I don't believe it is actually aromatizing to true estrogen. So I
Okay.
don't think it's
Hard
something
to
you're
manage through
necessarily
like
going
an
to be able to do.
AI or a Primo or Masteron.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the number that you get on the blood test may not necessarily be an accurate
Yeah.
representation of um, total free circulating hormones that are able to impact on the estrogen receptor.
Mhm.
So it's one that I don't necessarily think blood work is going to be able to tell you exactly where you need to be in terms of like your AI or your Primo and your Masteron and everything to control everything. I think it's something you probably need to use a little bit more feel with, unfortunately, which is not ideal, but sometimes you're just limited to certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not too much else I can think of there. Believe it was available. I think there is an oral version of Trustolone available as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Half-life sort of sitting around, like, I mean, if it's oral, like maybe daily, is that the sort of idea there?
I'm not too sure on the oral, but I would assume so. Trestolone or the actual the actual trade name meant is Trestolone acetate. So that's obviously a fast ester, but you do have some underground labs that are producing Trestolone and enthate now, which obviously gives you a little bit more wiggle room with injection frequency and whatnot.
Yeah. Would you like? is there any real reason to use like a ment, so faster acting, faster ester versus like a? 'Cause I actually have heard like tretinoin and ment be used. Ment's relatively popular, versus like the Trenbolone for like it seems to be relatively popular with like strength guys versus like Tren. Do you see like there's a benefit to using? Is it just the fact that there's like doesn't it's not as dry, a little bit of water, like tension and stuff in there as well? Is it highly anabolic in the short term
Yep.
if you're using
Yeah,
it?
look, yeah, I believe so, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a potent drug. Yeah, I have used it in one prep where it was my main drug. I didn't want to touch tren or
Yeah,
anything harsh in that prep. Uh, I used a little bit of Trest, I think some testosterone, and then some pre-workout injectables,
yeah,
and that was a pretty
yeah.
phenomenal prep for me.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. And then key dosages, like what were you sort of working with at that time?
At that time, I was younger, and it was probably a little bit higher than it should have been because there was very little information around on this
Hmm,
back then. This was when you could buy it off research chemical sites back then.
interesting. Yeah,
I think I worked up to 50 milligrams a day, which is probably too much.
yeah,
I
okay,
think probably about 200 milligrams a week is probably where most
yeah,
people are going to be at the top end,
yeah.
with doses as little as kind of 100-ish milligrams being effective as well.
Would you be putting that in pre-workout, or was it something that you would do pre-workout, or just kind of daily?
I've only used the injectable form, so I was just doing it daily, same
Yeah,
kind of way you do a Trenace injection or whatever.
yeah.
But you probably could use the oral versions of pre-workout. I just don't have any experience with it.
Did you, as like a anecdotal experience, did you notice a uptick or upregulation of just strength pretty quickly or immediately with the use of it?
I was coming out the back of another prep, so I was already pretty
Pretty strong.
strong and in a
Yeah.
peaked spot. So probably not really, but there was definitely an improvement from one prep to the next.
Yeah. And obviously, like the key blood work considerations are going to be those like estrogen side effects and stuff like that, which we discussed, which may not be 100% present in
Yeah.
that side effect side of stuff. And is there a timeline that you would run that just being like high estrogen and a relatively potent drug? Would you limit your exposure there to like a shorter period of time, or is it pretty reasonable to run a reasonable cycle?
I think dosage is going to come into that.
Mhm.
I think at the dosages most people are going to use for strength, 6 to 8 weeks is probably about right. I think it could definitely be used at like that 10 to 20 milligram a day mark for probably longer term during an off season. But you just have to monitor blood pressure and things of those nature to see if you're kind of susceptible to those blood pressure elevations
Yeah,
and side effects like that, which are obviously going to have long term deleterious health outcomes.
love it. Is there anything else you want to mention before we sign off on today's podcast around the DHT 19 North family?
I'm pretty sure check drops falls under the
Ah,
DHT, sorry, the 19 Nor family, which is hard to find, but if you have access to them, it is definitely a strength-based drug that you do see popping up at comps.
yeah, that's a very important one to probably mention because they are fucking rising in popularity.
Yeah.
Um, Look, never used, no experience. So talk to me. Check drops, why? Because I've seen them pop up, like I've seen them as relatively popular. What's the
Yep, the
mechanism?
last two
Why?
years.
Yeah, what's the mechanism why we're using them?
Okay, they are an extraordinary, like I believe these are the highest androgenic anabolic ratio of any steroid on the market. I believe they are a veterinary castration drug
Huh,
for female dogs, I think. Pretty sure it's somewhere in that ballpark anyway.
yeah.
Um, this is a drug that's so potent, we're dosing in micrograms. This is not a milligram dose drug. This is
Uh,
250, 500, 1,000 micrograms.
yeah.
Not something I have personal experience with, but it is something I've seen popping up a lot over the last two
Mm,
years to
yeah.
become a lot more popular in powerlifting in
Yeah.
Australia.
Interesting. Side effects. Why are we being mindful of what we're doing?
Um, Extraordinarily liver toxic.
Yeah.
Uh, Probably, I mean, up there, potentially, probably more liver toxic than methyltren. It's quite possibly the most toxic oral you can take.
Yep.
Especially if kind of equated to a milligram to milligram kind of dosage. Like there is no, I'm pretty sure you would die if you took 50 milligrams of check drops.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure the
So,
toxicity would kill you.
so make sure you get your fucking measurements right.
Yeah,
Micrograms, not milligrams. Uh,
yeah.
Wildly androgenic and anabolic. Uh, Highly like in terms of like a neurological response for strength, highly neurological, like in terms of like upregulating a neurological output, also
Yeah,
quite high.
definitely. Yeah. And when it's highly anabolic on paper. It's far too toxic to actually really be anabolic in practice because you're just not going to be able to use it for any period of time.
Yeah, yeah, for like a length of time. Cool. Any key considerations with blood work there?
Uh,
Obviously,
yeah,
all
make sure your liver's still inside your body.
yeah. Hold on.
Yeah,
I'm assuming it would be like just a pre-workout drug at that point, like because it's so toxic.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
If even some people are just using it comp day. I know it's
Yeah.
very common to be
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Okay. So
used
it's
on
just like
comp
a
day.
little treat on comp day. Um,
Yeah.
and general like administration dosages.
Yeah, 250 to like maybe 2000 micrograms at the total upper end of dosing.
Would use or wouldn't use personally.
Look, I would try it. Um, yeah, look, I have spoken to a couple of pretty big powerlifters as of recent that made some pretty big improvements in their totals with
Yeah, sure.
this being
Yeah.
added into the to the mix.
Yeah.
So
So
obviously, I don't think it's a game changer for anyone. I don't want to come out saying or sounding like it's the secret pill or anything of that nature. I've never taken it before, but yeah, it's definitely a potent drug, and I've certainly seen a few pretty pretty solid powerlifters as of late have some good results from it.
yeah, interesting. Love it. Uh, Fantastic. That, everybody, is the DHT and 19 North family. That concludes sort of like our anabolic androgenic steroid, basically like family tree. So testosterone, DHT, and 19 North. So next month we will start to get into some of the other fun ancillary drugs that you might be considering when doing strength sports primarily. We'll put together a bit of a list of some description around not just peptides, but there's a bunch of ancillary options that we might even start with a key episode on like the key ones that you should use instead of just doing a general like here's peptides, here's other ancillary drugs. Be like, if you're a strength athlete, these are some of the things that you might be looking at in terms of like not just like peptides, but ancillary drugs, nootropic drugs, anything that's going to help you perform as a strength athlete. I
Yeah,
think,
there's so many things in this
yeah,
category that we can go into. This could be multiple episodes
yeah,
long for sure.
yeah. My list is very long.
Awesome. I look forward
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah, and then we might even do like a hey, if you're a tested athlete, maybe these are some of the things. Like, I mean, that's big business now. Like, it's like there's a lot of tested strength athletes, and it's like it's not that you want to exploit it, but like, what can you take to improve your performance that falls under the WADA list, right? Like the
And there are rules there for a reason. You're crazy if you don't think anyone you're competing against isn't going to the end of the
of
rules.
course,
It's
yeah, the rules there to exploit. That's what sport is.
yeah, exactly right.
If they're not cheating completely, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, it's I
you ain't
mean.
cheating, you ain't trying.
Yeah, if I mean at our level, like most hobbyist levels, like you're not gonna see a lot of that, but like you'd be surprised. But
Yeah,
like when there's things on the line, like it's almost inevitable. There's a reason why we see people get popped all the fucking time because people are doing it.
yeah, yeah,
So it's like, okay, cool. Like what on that list? What's on that list or not on that list that can actually highly impact your performance, right? So a couple cool episodes coming up for both tested and non-tested lifters, which I think will be really cool. But that is the family tree done. Thanks for joining us, Connor, and we'll see you guys all in a month.